Going to be talking about the youth involvement in, or what their role could be in shaping the tax laws, changing the tax regimes, and of course trying to create a discussion there to see that they are favorable and inclusive of everyone. A lot of questions still linger around what positions they need to take up on and what their role is exactly in this whole talk of taxation. And to discuss that with me is Mr. Blaise Okwaro from the Open Forum Initiative. We want to understand what best, or how best to position the youth to advocate for change or to deliberately involve themselves in changing the tax laws. Thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me, Madrin.
Please do tell us about yourself and, of course, what the Open Forum Initiative does.
Okay, so my name is Blaise Okwaro. I am a programs manager at the Open Forum Initiative. Now, the Open Forum Initiative is a special kind of NGO, CSO rather. It's a civic tech policy advocacy non-profit, right? That focuses on using data to advance participatory social auditing. And our main focus is in areas of fiscal policy. So we focus on issues of taxation, revenue mobilization, and we feel that now is the time for young people, youth, to have a guided discussion and intervention in issues of taxation. So currently we are running a project funded by OSEA that focuses on youth participation in matters of tax justice. And we have undertaken a robust movement, especially in the local government youth scene, specifically in tax.
All right. When you talk about tax justice, what do you mean?
Well, tax justice is a combination of basically two very complex subjects. The first is taxation, and the second is the aspect of justice. So when it comes to tax justice, we are trying to look at are the people who are supposed to pay taxes paying the right amount? Are they paying it on time? And as a result of this whole tax arena, there comes something called a social contract. Now, with a social contract, we as ordinary citizens give in our right of free will, and we add that up with payment of taxes. And in return, we hope government can create an atmosphere in which every citizen can benefit. Now, tax justice is a tool for us to make sure that social contract is actually effected. So we make sure we're not paying too much, we're paying just the right amount, and we make sure that when you pay that money, you actually get value for the taxation. But it all begins with what we are calling tax awareness.
Let's first of all cite some of the injustices that are already in place, especially around the tax regime.
Well, we can't necessarily call them injustices as yet, but we can call them gaps.
Okay.
We can call them gaps. The first fundamental gap is the absence of youth participation in areas of tax justice. You must understand that youth, especially nowadays, are more inclined to concentrate on different issues, mostly social issues. Politics, well, let's say politics, well, but most of the time they are more inclined to participate in social issues. There is very little or no participation of youth in the issues of taxation. What we see is some form of superficial participation. You know, there are structures in local government, there are MP structures in parliament, there are structures in basically every level of government that are set out to cater for youth participation in taxation. But the participation still remains superficial. Why? Because of the access to information. Most information regarding domestic revenue mobilization and taxation is covered up in very complex figures. And that makes it a no-go for very many young people. You know, when the budget comes out, the young people who make a majority of the population are supposed to actually be involved in the whole budget process. You know, when a new tax is rolled out, the young people are the ones who are going to pay a majority of the taxes. I mean, when you see prices rising from customs increments in taxation, it's mostly incurred and faced by the young people. But there's very little involvement of young people in that sector. And, you know, it made us wonder why, you know. So we try to focus on simplification of that information. So the first gap would be the youth participation, you know. The second gap would come in the laws. Given that we're a very young country, we are also experiencing the progressive development of a tax regime, you know. We have about 5 major tax laws that govern how we operate: income tax, VAT, stamp duty, customs laws that are not made from from Uganda, but are made at an East Africa-wide level. Now, these laws require concerted effort. You get? There's supposed to be parliament coming in, youth participation from the local levels, from the grassroots, that help to mold most of the tax laws that we engage with in a day-to-day. So the second gap would be the laws, but I can't say that they are bad. I can say that they're still young, and they need to grow with the times. Let me give a small example: the digital era we are getting into. One of the latest amendments to the income tax laws creates a new withholding tax for people dealing as sales representatives. Now, this can easily capture what we have. There are these people on Twitter, Facebook, influencers. The influencers. Yes, they play a very good role in the modern day digital marketing structure. But you can easily class them as sales representatives. The money they receive is very small. The tax seems to create an overbearing imposition on the money they will receive, meaning that there is a high chance that the disposable income of people participating in the digital economy can be affected. Let's look at OTT as well. And we cannot say that these are mistakes that government is being made because they need to look for money, but there has to be a better approach on how they are handled. For example, I still go back to the digital era. This is something that's almost inevitable. For the global economy to properly merge, we have to embrace the digital era. Now, in embracing the digital era, to encourage the new industry, you usually have incentivization. That is why when we want, yes, what we attract. Now, to build a digital economy, it has to be specifically incentivized. You get? So with the absence of incentivization, there is a high chance that we shall be late to the digital race. And these are things that need to be taken up when we start thinking about the tax laws. But who are the people who interact with the digital era the most? It's the youth. Yes. So their absence in this scene will create a failure for us to properly merge tax laws with the current realities we face. Another issue that comes up that we find is policy. But policy is broad. It's very broad, and it boils from a very wide spectrum of elements. You start from agriculture, you run to education. All those aspects need to come together for us to create a comprehensive tax system. One thing we noticed when we were moving around for our regional tax justice initiatives, we went to Hoima. Yes, Hoima is one of our 4 regional partners in influencing tax justice among the youth at local government level. We found that for an extractive-rich region, you see, the funny thing with extractives, the population needs to be educated first, either with technical skills or the white-collar jobs. Yeah. They need to receive a certain amount of education so that there can be local content, The domestic population, the residents of that area can easily merge into the job market created by the extractives, and there are a bunch of benefits: local service tax, employment tax, quickly building the tax base of that particular region. But we noticed that in that area, Hoima, which is not so far from Kampala, there was a very big deficiency in the education. There's a very big deficiency in access to modern learning. You see, so this means that those people in that area will have less access to the jobs. Less access to the jobs means local government will have less access to taxes that they could easily collect, be it employment income tax or local service tax. Yeah. That means that area, which has a very huge opportunity in natural resource and revenue, has an even smaller opportunity in collecting the taxes from that area. So policy plays a large role, and we feel that there might be certain gaps. So for me and the team at TOFI, we feel those are the 3 main areas of concern when it comes to gaps. All
right. Now that we've understood where the concern is, let's also unpack the role of the youth in trying to bridge these gaps that you mentioned.
Thank you very much. I was dying for that part. Now, before I unpack the role, I think I would want to incentivize the role with the importance of taxation. Okay. Now, tax plays 4 very key. Now, tax has its own role. So let's say tax is important for 4 major reasons. The first being revenue. If you think about the ways in which the state earns money, there are really, really few. There is natural resources, oil and gas. There is donor funding. You know, that's the money that comes in from bigger countries abroad and which we borrow. Yes, there's grants and then there's borrowing. But then there is the more sustainable one, which is taxation. Now the issue with the other two, natural resources are capital intensive and we would need to first beg for more money to actually set up. I don't know if you're seeing how much money is going to be spent on the thermal-heated pipeline, the time it takes to negotiate. So the time within which we break even is extended longer, so the benefit takes much more time. The other issue with funding, you see, you can't have no strings attached when you're borrowing money from anyone, especially when we're getting it from the Western world. So the existence of these strings causes a lot of strain. One, on our fiscal policy. Two, on how we interact as a people, especially Ugandan people. Because there's going to be influences on certain laws, you see. There's going to be influences on how the money should be spent. So we cannot prioritize our own national interests because whoever has given the money has set a specific set of goals to be achieved. So there's a problem with that. Now, it leaves us with taxation. Sustainable, comprehensive, and within our control. We can actually decide and say that the money collected from here should be used for this. Let me give you an example. In countries like India and Tanzania, they have an extra thing they add to their taxes called a cess. Now, a cess is a special kind of levy on a tax that is attributed to a particular thing. So, for example, in India, it's on agriculture. So every company of a certain size will have to pay an extra 5% of the cess, and that money will be used to benefit a certain form of agriculture. Now you see it clearly. You pay to play. So taxation stands out to be the most sustainable form of government revenue. The second importance of tax is through redistribution of income. You see, we have a big problem. We have a very huge youth population, right? This means in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to have an alarming elderly population, 20 to 30 years along the line. Now, for elderly people, it's always prudent for governments to create a social support structure, a welfare structure. Currently, there is one in place. I think the SAGE, yes. I didn't want to just say SAGE, but thank you. You brought me home. So the SAGE. Now, the SAGE is it's a very admirable thing that government is trying to start. It's a social welfare or social protection program. But the thing is, it's still small, and the amount of resources they have to facilitate that are limited. I don't know if you noticed that it's 25,000 shillings, and it has been tried out in less than 15 districts. Beneficiaries are approximately below 130,000. So, but where is the money for welfare coming from? This has to be generated internally from revenues, taxes we collect. Now, welfare is a very fundamental part of income redistribution. You know, it's like a store. If you've been paying taxes for the last 20 years, you know that government is going to have your back and take care of you as you age. And being 65 is not cheap. It's very, very expensive. So some of these welfare programs are supported by the taxes we pay. And tax support plays a very fundamental role in making sure that we shall have revenue to take care of the youth as they get elderly. So I think it's a very serious concern for us to start thinking about how much taxes are we paying, where is the tax being kept, how is it being used. So these are serious questions for redistribution. Well, another issue that raises importance from tax is representation. Now, tax plays a very fundamental role in representation. You see, when you give someone money, you have a bigger right of demanding for results. That is why the workplace is a very stressful place, because you took up someone's money and you must, create value for it. So when we pay these taxes and when we are comfortable paying these taxes, it gives every citizen a bigger ground to hold government accountable for certain basic needs. You see, the roads need to be constructed, but I believe a majority of Ugandans actually, when we went for our regional outreach in tax justice, we noticed that most of the youth out there felt like they were being given a privilege when the road is built in their
Actually, most Ugandans feel like they're doing them a favor.
Yes, you feel like it's a favor, but that's not how it works.
That shows you how tax illiterate we all
Yes, yes, yes. You are entitled to some of the things that are available. You're entitled to a good road, healthcare. It's just that we are lagging behind on most of these things, but the entitlement of a citizen is very broad. And when we pay our taxes, we get more of the confidence to ask. We were very surprised that after giving the capacity building to some of our regional partners and youth in the local government, they immediately got the energy to demand for services from their local government. They sat down with the representatives and said, it seems we have now I think in Uganda they call it a mabanja. You know, there's a debt for taxes paid previously. They require certain services to be fulfilled. Yes, and then repricing. You see, it's scary if a young person is engaging in business and is not considering the tax climate. Whenever customs taxes are increased, say importation of things like chocolate, electronics, even beauty products, it increases the price internally because every purchaser is going to have to pay a certain amount of tax. So with every increment in a customs taxation, there's going to be an internal increase in prices. So how we play around with the prices is very, very important. I would give you one clear example, and I know we are pressed for time. After the COVID-19, there was released COVID-19 relief amendments. They're still being debated in Parliament, but they are a very necessary thing for our economy. And in some of these amendments, certain people were going to be exempted from taxes so that the price of the products would reduce. Specifically, those who are going to deal in PPE and hand sanitizers. Unfortunately, the tax relief was for the raw materials, not for the final product. So when you put it on raw materials, even those who are not producing hand sanitizers are really going to benefit from the incentives. But yes, so that's the power of taxation. It creates an ability for us to play with prices. So we would understand which prices need to be reduced, what needs to be incentivized. There are certain things that are not taxed. For example, there are certain medical elements that are not taxed. Certain key things like mosquito nets are not taxed. And you can quickly see the need for not taxing them, so that we reduce the access to certain medical products. So those are the four importances of tax. Now, the role of the youth. The youth play a very significant role. One, for the fact that they have enough energy to go to court and try to raise an issue they find on a problem. They have enough energy to go to Parliament and ask the members of Parliament to consider certain taxes. The most important thing actually is at the local government. They have the right to influence at the grassroots. And I think it's a long time coming for us to start thinking about local government taxation. Because one of the best ways to enhance a strong tax regime is to start boiling it from the bottom, from the grassroots. So when the local governments collect sufficient revenue, they channel it straight to the central government and immediately improve how our tax system works. So their role is largely advocacy, and advocacy in the smartest sense. Let them debate, let them lobby, don't let them go for public interest litigation. And institutions like the Open Forum Initiative have been doing this since 2018. We have created a robust atmosphere supported by our partners like Siatini and the Tax Justice Alliance. We have created an ecosystem for youth to participate effectively. We have a very beautiful campaign called the Ishuru campaign, in which we allow a young person to come with basic knowledge on taxation. You know, one of the things that youth lack is a forum, basic knowledge on taxation, and engage freely. We have participated in a lot of public interest litigation, OTT taxation, we have been there. And I think it's for me, I think it's an opportunity for us to invite the youth to come and participate in some of the initiatives we have in fighting for tax justice. So their role is essential: debate, public interest litigation, moving to Parliament, lobbying. And there's so many ways. Nowadays, people have the most crazy advocacy techniques. People are using Instagram to take pictures, say no to child sacrifice. And they drive campaigns on social media. So youth should take the key advantage of social media and the digital era to push forward elements of tax justice.
Do we have the capacity, or do we even know what we're going to do? Do we have the information to be able to drive something as big as taxation?
Oh, thank you very much, Madrin. When we speak of capacity, we usually address it in two ways. The first being information, and the second being finance. So I will focus mostly on information because it's the primary thing in this discussion. In terms of information, there is a lot of information out there, especially with the information age. It's just one Google click away, and the youth have access to this information. Now the problem is that they might not be simplified information, and taxation is not something that people come across on, it's not like a hit song that it takes about, it has a lifespan of 30 seconds and someone understands everything that's going on. So there is a need for simplification of that tax information. And like I told you earlier, since 2018 we have been trying to simplify this information using social media, especially Twitter. And we have been giving the youth small snippets. It's like a growth dose in tax education. But I think all other CSOs in this field of taxation should be striving towards the same goal, making this information easy to understand. Once it's made easy to understand, there's really no limits to how the youth can help form a better tax environment. And just to say this, it's not new for youth to participate in taxation. People have been doing this thing for centuries. You'll be surprised to understand that one of the biggest tax justice initiatives Uganda has had happened in about 2005, and that is close to something called graduated tax. I don't know if you recall that conversation. Too many jokes, and that was the prime of tax justice, by the way. It was a time when the tax discussion was made everywhere, in every room, in every home. The tax was being discussed. Access to information would be very easy to access when it's made simpler. But again, as we simplify this tax information, because that child really understood what taxation was about if the moment she identified us like that. Once we simplify tax information, there is need for us to also alter the attitudes towards payment of taxes. Like I discussed earlier, it is one of the most sustainable ways for government to raise revenue. And ever since that, because of issues like graduated taxation, people developed a certain negative attitude towards tax. I was trying to get back to the 2005 thing. Somehow I digressed a bit with the story. But in 2005, that was the biggest tax justice, one of the biggest tax justice initiatives, because we actually overturned graduated tax. By we, I mean the general populace of the country. And that tax stopped, mostly because of the methods of collection, the method in which the money was being stored. It didn't make any sense for Ugandans. And at that moment, they came up and fought against that kind of regressive tax. Before 2005, there were also issues in 1960s there of people arguing against certain types of taxes. Asking the chiefs, what's up with the hat and the gun tax? What's happening here and there? Even in areas like, in times like 1980s there, scholars like Mamdani write about a time that, which made, people have their scholarly opinions, but he attributes Obote's fall, not 100%, but to a small extent, to some of the increment in graduated tax at the time. So there has been involvement of Ugandans in taxation. It's just died down a bit because of the over-reliance on foreign aid. So we need to alter our attitudes towards the taxation. We shouldn't look at tax as a bad thing or as a thing that is there to reduce or dwindle your incomes, but we should look at it as a form of empowerment for us and the Ugandans of the future. So alongside with building capacity, making the data much more easy to understand, we should look at alteration of the attitudes of Ugandans. And I believe if we do that, capacity can be built in terms of information. The second issue is finance. Well, government needs to come up and cater for some of these issues, because there is support, although in terms of advocacy, from what I've got to learn, fiscal advocacy has the most limited support.
Okay.
There is very little attention to it, therefore very little finance comes to it, and yet it is the most vital point of advocacy. You cannot talk about sexual health and reproduction or access to health in hospitals if there is no revenue for government to function with. You can't talk about the extractives industry without focusing on how tax and revenue is going to be. So I think it should be the focal point for advocacy, and it needs to be financed even more than what is, yes, from government, from donors, from even well-wishers in the country. I mean, it doesn't hurt to contribute for a good cause.
Okay, please. Having established that, let's look at the tools that TOFI is giving out to the youth, or which they can use to apply their significance in society, especially around tax justice.
Well, I will not stop re-echoing that since 2018 we have set up a number of tax justice initiatives, and our focus mostly has been data-driven advocacy. We believe that if you really want to argue for change, you must back it up with some evidence. And one of our primary advocacy tools, and that we have extended to the local government youth, is policy position papers, where it requires an aggressive evidence hunt. Look for data to argue your case. Always look for data. You cannot expect to effect change without substantial data on the subject you want to change, and also create an alternative. So some of the tools we provide as TOFI are our forums. We have a forum called the Ushuru Campaign, where we encourage young people to talk about tax. And we bring it to very, very basic level, handling some of the contentious issues of the day. If it comes to media and entertainment, we try to talk about issues like performance rights, royalties that arise. Can there be some form of special tax arrangement that allows the artists to pay but also benefit effectively? And there we invite them, the players in the fields, to discuss and talk about some of the challenges they are facing. Because you see, the funny thing with government policy, specifically tax policy, or government policy in general, is that governments don't have the luxury of testing policy.
They bring it ready for implementation.
Yeah, they bring it and they implement it. So there are very high chances that there are going to be some mistakes here and there, some errors, bugs in the system. But one of the easiest ways to reduce those chances of the bugs and the errors is by having a participatory and inclusive policy-making process. So TOFI has tried to create forums for youth engagement in the policy-making process, and we started with the local governments to allow youth actively invest their time in policy formulation, specifically regarding areas of taxation. So the other avenues we create are our media and social media snippets. The first step to being a good tax justice advocate is to get yourself informed. And we try as much as possible to create a pool of information in the ways that are more palatable for the young people. Because
to be able to understand.
Yes, to be able to understand, to be able to consume. Because of this technology, attention spans are also reducing as we keep moving. So we create information that is easy to consume within a short period of time and interesting enough for you to keep prying and ask.
And conversing yourself with. What we need to understand, Blaise, is what should a youth do to position themselves?
Yes.
In fighting for this tax justice?
Yes. The first thing, like we have said, is information. They should hunt for information. They should associate themselves with civil society initiatives from people like Siatini, the Youth for Tax Justice, the Open Forum Initiative, CSBAG. All these NGOs are there to kind of give a helping hand to youth in integrating with these systems. Now, there are other avenues the youth can use. There are issues of public interest litigation. I, for one, and TOFI here have participated in a few. Very recently, we filed a case in court over the rental rates. And we want to put a message out there that young people are watching and are trying to understand how the tax system is being formulated. In that case, we're raising some very good issues. I don't want to to spoil the scene for people to engage.
We should just watch the space.
They should just watch the space, follow through with the proceedings. Specifically, that's what youth are supposed to be doing right now, following through with some of these proceedings that are in court, also engaging in parliament. I think I'll say this over and over again: talk to your MP, talk to your local government.
How about if they position themselves directly into places of elections? I mean, are going for political positions. Wouldn't that help?
Yes. Oh, thank you so much.
I feel like this is where they're going to get the audacity or even the platforms to speak.
Yes, thank you so much. One of the things we also notice in our initiative is that tax needs to be made a political discussion.
Absolutely.
In other countries, a candidate is never going to stand up without talking about taxation. People need to know. So yes, youth should take up this seat, but they should concentrate on having the information, the relevant information, to participate in a meaningful political way in enhancing the tax regime.
All right. Away from all this, even as we speak about tax justice, the role of youth in enforcing this, we cannot miss discussing if Ugandans are really getting the value for money. I mean, even as we advocate for local revenue resourcing and making sure that we can sustainably collect enough revenue locally. But in your own perspective, even before we advocate for justice while collecting it, are we getting value for it?
We must understand that our country is still growing, and the amount of time we have had for stable growth is really less than 30 years. If we're looking at the amount of time that the country has sat down to structure things. So, whereas the value for money is small, it's happening, it's actually there, roads are being constructed, schools there's a UPE, ongoing UPE system, we just talked about SAGE. I feel like there's more that can be done.
So don't we have to position the youth there?
Very much so. The youth actually have to fix themselves in those spaces, and they really need to do this with an understanding of patriotism, because it's very easy for someone to enter political office and never do anything.
Yes.
So they have to think in a manner that, not for me but for us, some sort of Ubuntu feel, and so that they can move our service delivery from where it is right now to a much better position. So where we are is not a good place, but it's also not a bad one as well. It's a place that creates some hope.
I like that you appreciate we already have something in place.
We have to appreciate. I don't think it's easy to run a country. It must be a daunting task. Yes.
Okay, away from the 2005 incident that you highlighted, what other aspect or what other success in terms of succession, or in terms of taxation, that the youth have driven home?
Okay, well, that's interesting. Now, as the Open Forum Initiative, the first success that we have is giving local government youth access to tax justice information. That's the first one. Because when we did a baseline survey before we started, we noticed that about 83% of the youth in local governments had no idea of how tax works. No idea. And after we managed to have this capacity building, a large majority of them are able to engage in taxation. And even now as we speak, I've actually started making some movements in the local government tax process. On a wider scale, I think we achieved, with our partners in the Tax Justice Alliance, some very good efforts in mobile money taxation. I think you saw that reduction. We were there lending our youth full expertise. And also OTT taxation. We participated with some of our colleagues in filing a case. I think filing that case is a victory in itself. Yeah. It's putting yourself out there to say, we want you to consider some of the youth issues. There are a large number of small battles that have been won here and there, but off the top of my head, I think I can think of those.
Okay. So it's good to put those on record so that we know there's actually a track record of achievement in this line. Before we wind up, let's discuss, in your perspective, the tax base in Uganda. We of course have some revenue that is generated locally, and then we have a lot of borrowing that has put us to a point of asking for a debt cancellation. What is your assessment of the revenue base locally here?
Very nice question to ask. I think there needs to be a very, very comprehensive discussion on the tax base, a very comprehensive one, because we have a very big problem with harmful incentives. And Siatini has raised this issue a number of times. There's a really big problem with incentives in the sense that for you to incentivize something, you only give incentives to people who cannot sustain themselves in the current market dynamics. So we feel that there are so many incentives that just are being given even without proper assessment of whether they need to be given or not. I'm going to give you two examples. The first example is a very recent one, and it might not even have already come into play, but there's need to create some attention towards these aspects. The COVID-19 relief. There was some form of pardon for companies placed in amendments, and they were focusing on manufacturing entities, floriculture, tourism. I mean, if you look at the three examples I've given you, two of them really don't need to be incentivized. Even during this COVID period, manufacturing entities have been working. There is no manufacturing industry that decided to stop. The production might have even increased because people are at home doing nothing. So incentivizing such a person over things like schools, who really needed an incentive or some kind of waiver at this time, that's where the play comes in. The priorities. So I feel there needs to be a restructuring of incentivizations for the tax base, as well as certain areas need to be opened up for taxation. Agriculture cannot remain a no-go zone for taxation anymore, because not taxing it actually denies it the chance of quicker growth. There are some sectors that have alarming incentives, like the transport sector. It's heavily incentivized in a manner that is, I looked at it and I was like, wow, this is what they call a real incentive. So also we need to review foreign investor incentives that are handed out, because an incentive must translate into actual benefit for the people. If someone is being incentivized to open up a factory in the country, we need to also investigate whether the wage structure is beneficial to Ugandans. You can't employ us as cleaners and what. So there's not enough time to discuss what needs to be done for the tax base. More taxes in certain key areas, incentives need to be properly managed, and other areas need to be reduced in taxes. For example, youth businesses, especially after COVID-19, there has to be a discussion on how we can incentivize youth businesses. Yes.
Your last recommendations in just a minute.
Well, I would encourage tax to be made a more political discussion. Members of parliament, local government representatives, even the highest seat in the office, there has to be a discussion revolving around tax. When a manifesto is made, we need to hear the tax plan. I would still encourage the youth to participate heavily in issues of tax justice, because it has an overbearing implication on our existence from now and in the next few years. I also want to add, I think, one recommendation. We have really rolled out a lot of tax justice initiatives as the Open Forum initiative, and I would encourage youth to participate effectively. Let them come in actively and engage with some of our initiatives. I also want to say thank you, by the way. I want to say thank you for this opportunity, and also want to thank some of our donors, the Open OSEA. I also want to thank Siatini and everyone else who has helped to make a sustainable and consistent tax justice struggle.